some of the main points. So here, many, I would say, what are in broad brushes, what are the kinds of things that can be scaled up? It's what you can see is, first of all, many of these systems are both very diverse, so some kind of encouragement for science, for agricultural research to try to incorporate some of this diversity. I mean, you know, rather than producing high-yielding rubber that absolutely needs to be there without anything around it, to work towards producing high-yielding rubber that actually can be produced in a more diverse system. Many of these systems are also cyclic, something that we have a lot of problems with, you know, of understanding how you can have changeable systems. But quite frankly, we tend to allow this and even encourage this in certain environments. In Europe, you know, using fire to do something is seen as a good thing now because we value those systems and we value those landscapes. But when it's done in Indonesia or done in the tropics or whatever, we often don't, you know, we don't work. We label it as something else, and therefore we don't work in ways to improve it. So I know I'm just rambling on, I'm not really answering your question, but to some extent we have to ask, I think, that scaling up question in somewhat different ways, because if it's always wanting to have one model that can then be replicated, you know, replicated in many, many areas, then we never get, we never, you know, something always replaces this. When we recognize, when we always want to go to large scale, then these guys are always at a disadvantage. And I think that within, let's say, the system that I work in the CGIAR system, if we always talk only about intensification as the way to go, then these guys always necessarily lose out. So it's certainly not the only answer. It's not, you know, it's not the answer, but it needs to be part of the answer somewhere.
It was not so much about intensification when I said scale up. It's more how to be able to increase the recognition of smallholders. And I know that what was behind the poverty environment networks, the work that we're doing was to inform a change in poverty reduction strategy papers, so that development policies can start taking into account environmental income. And curiosity, I would like to know where one has the poverty environment, so what you've been doing with the poverty environment network, if that has had an impetus in changing the way we're looking at questions of food security and development. Sorry, am I taking it?
Yes. I mean, essentially, we're still in the early stages of analysing the data from the Poverty and Environment Network. And for those who are not familiar with that project that CIFOR has been involved in, this is a multi-country household survey that has been replicated across, I think, 38 countries with 8,000 households. And the fundamental tenet of the immediate findings is that 1/5 of household income is generated from forest resources. How do we translate that into policy? That's a very good question. But you asked a much more pertinent question earlier about how you influence or empower, if you like, smallholder farmers. And essentially, there's no level playing field. Christine just mentioned right now the issue of agriculture in Europe and the US, and agricultural systems are supported by subsidies. And how can smallholder farmers who do provide almost half of the world's food compete against farmers who are subsidised to produce huge amounts of food with huge amounts of waste as well? And that's a major issue. So there's as I mentioned earlier, there's a political issue or aspect to food security which is often ignored. We think about the biophysical and the social aspects, but the political aspect is also very important as well.
If I may add also another element, I mean, besides the subsidies of the Western world to the farmers, there is also another important aspect in which the smallholder farmers are disadvantaged. And if you look at the extension service in most countries, the extension is only done if you adopt different varieties, which tends to lead to monoculture. So farmers that keep growing traditional systems do not receive any type of advice or support from the extension service. And these extension services are normally respected people within community, so it's another push, if you want, political to change those systems. And therefore the yields, and when you compare then yields of traditional systems versus improved varieties, is quite an unfair comparison, because those has a lot of support and push behind. The others is done without any type of even recognition or tentative to improve agronomic practices for those specific varieties. Yes, please.
Yeah, so with the issue of bushmeat again, I know like political stability, especially in Congo, might have a contribution on bushmeat consumption, sustainability of bushmeat consumption. Because I'm from Tanzania, and Congo is our neighbor. So we have a lot of firearms coming from Congo to Tanzania. And the people have firearms, so it's very easy to go for poaching, hunting, and other things. But again, also poverty, most part of the world, especially in Africa, sub-Saharan part of Africa, and Southeast Asia, countries like Burma, there is a lot of case studies of bushmeat consumption, which is not sustainable, and it has led to extinction of some of the species, local extinction in those areas, because some of the species are better preferred than others. So the main issue, I think, would be strengthen the political stability, especially in Congo, and in other areas to provide alternative source of nutrition, so that we can reduce the pressure to wild species which are threatened. And in countries like in Tanzania, we have quota. We set quota for hunting, so you can monitor that one, because if you have quota, you know the trends of particular species, so it's easier to have sustainable consumption, especially for traditional cultural aspect. For some of the tribes, they depend solely on bushmeat. So that's my contribution.
A quick comment. That's true, but then this also leads to what Robert raised earlier, is because most of these tribes are, I know quite well the case of Tanzania, and for example, in many cases those quotas are managed by hunting companies from overseas, and the local communities, and this probably raised a management issue, lead to a management issue raised by Robert, how local people can benefit from those environments, because those local communities in Tanzania that hunt on the game reserves are considered poachers, whereas hunting is their source of protein for millennia. But then, because the concession was given to the company, they are not allowed and they are not supposed to go into those areas to get the proteins from hunting. So they are considered illegal hunters, poachers, if you wish. So I think this is another key issue, how to regulate it and how the rights of those communities can be recognized.
I'd like to raise another issue. We've been talking a lot about agriculture. We've been sort of attacking it from the side of the agricultural, whether agricultural research or agricultural policy. But here we are at a conservation congress, and I think there's equally a question of these types of management not being valued by the conservation community as well. You know, where it always seems that, I mean, indigenous people, it's okay if they're in there and doing something sort of insignificant. The best thing they could possibly do is do nothing. And where do we actually value what they actually are doing there in creating these different kinds of forests, in allowing large populations to actually persist and maintain diversity and maintain forest cover, for example, maintain ecosystem services. You know, where do we give a prize to people for actually sort of messing with a forest and yet maintaining it a forest, and seeing that as possibly sort of better than just getting people out of a forest or getting them to do nothing, you know? So as long as what we from the conservation and from the forest, and as long as we consistently value, you know, people for doing nothing more than doing something that they have, you know, done over a long period of time, I think this will never, you know, from the conservation end, we'll never actually be able to maintain these systems either. I think we do value them, for instance, in Europe, where, you know, the creation of alpine meadows is actually a good thing, and so people are brought in to keep on farming, even if some of those Swiss people don't really want to farm anymore, because a meadow is good and there's biodiversity that's going to disappear if you do nothing there. But if you create a pasture in the tropics, that's called degradation, you know. I mean, in many of those areas, of course, pastures haven't been around for a while. But if you sort of mess with forests and all that, that's called degradation there. And yet, in Europe, if in Spain, burning certain areas is considered a good thing because it maintains a particular type of ecosystem. If it's done in Africa, very often it's forbidden and it's a bad thing. And yet it's at least as traditional there as it is in parts of Europe. So I think, again, there's a very, very different idea, especially when it's applied to tropical areas. But also it really isn't valued. It isn't valued as maintaining particular kinds of diversity in some of these areas. And that's what we're certainly, I think, trying to argue for here.
I think it's really afraid that we have to close. It's already 5 past.
Would it be possible to have a copy of your presentations?
Yes, sure.
I think that many of the presentations could be available certainly on the CIFOR website.
Okay.
It's a good way to do it. And anybody, and I can certainly give you Christina Egg-Henter's email address, and I think I can distribute the paper. Let me.
And also, I think if you go to the website of this workshop on the IUCN, if you look in the program of the IUCN, we make sure that all the uploads are there.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you all for coming, for your interest, for the nice discussion we had, and have a nice lunch.